As Sarah stood in the living room, the excitement of her long-awaited honeymoon bubbling inside her, everything came crashing down in an instant. Just moments before they were supposed to leave for the airport, her husband Edward ripped up her passport in front of her. Her heart sank, and her mind raced, unable to comprehend what was happening. Why would he do this? The honeymoon, the trip she had looked forward to for months, suddenly felt like a cruel joke. Sarah could barely catch her breath as she stared at the shredded pieces of her passport, her future plans unraveling before her eyes. What could have caused her loving husband to betray her so completely? Was there something she had missed all along, hidden beneath the surface of their relationship? As confusion and pain overwhelmed her, one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Sarah, a 29-year-old woman, had always been dedicated to her career, spending the last 7 years working hard to build a life for herself. She wasn't the type to seek attention or try to impress anyone, preferring the quiet comfort of her routine. At work, she excelled, earning respect for her diligence and thoughtful approach to every task. It was there that she met Edward, a charming and ambitious colleague. Over time, their friendship blossomed into a relationship, and Sarah couldn't have been happier. Edward was everything she thought she wanted in a partner: kind, caring, and supportive. When he proposed, Sarah felt as though she was living in a dream, excited about their future together. The wedding was a whirlwind, but it was everything Sarah had imagined. She couldn't wait to finally go on their honeymoon, a chance to celebrate their new life as a married couple. Sarah was a shy, reserved person, often preferring to keep to herself rather than make waves. But with Edward, she felt safe, confident, and ready to start this new chapter of her life. Little did she know, the dream she had worked so hard for was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way. The engagement should have been the happiest time of Sarah's life, but as the wedding planning began, it quickly became clear that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. From the very beginning, Sarah noticed her soon-to-be mother-in-law, Deborah, taking a more active role in the wedding preparations than expected. While Sarah had dreamed of a simple, intimate ceremony, Deborah's vision was grand, lavish, and filled with demands. At first, Sarah chalked it up to typical motherly excitement, but as time went on, it became apparent that Edward's mother wasn't just offering suggestions, she was taking control. Deborah's expectations for the wedding grew more extravagant by the day. She wanted a bigger venue, more guests, and expensive designer decorations. While Sarah wanted to keep things modest, she found herself constantly compromising to avoid conflict, even as the financial strain began to mount. The cost of the wedding, paired with the pressure of pleasing Deborah, weighed heavily on Sarah. Every decision, from the guest list to the dress, seemed to be overshadowed by Deborah's overbearing presence. As the wedding day approached, Sarah became more and more isolated. Her attempts to communicate her concerns to Edward were met with indifference. He would brush off her worries, telling her to just let his mom handle things, because she knows what's best. Sarah felt like she was being sidelined in what was supposed to be her special day. The excitement she once felt for the future now felt tainted by her growing frustration and sense of powerlessness. The dream wedding she had once envisioned was slipping away, and with it, her hopes for the life she had always wanted with Edward. Just after the wedding, Sarah's hopes of starting a new life with Edward in their own home were dashed. Edward insisted they live with his parents for a while, citing financial reasons and the convenience of being closer to family. Sarah, shocked and frustrated, couldn't believe what she was hearing. She had envisioned a home of their own, a place where they could build their lives together. Instead, she found herself once again caught in the web of Edward's mother's influence. Edward's dismissal of her feelings only deepened Sarah's sense of alienation. She had hoped that after their marriage, they would start their new life independently. But instead, she felt like a guest in someone else's home. The tension between Sarah and Deborah became unbearable. Deborah constantly hovered, offering unsolicited advice, critiquing Sarah's cooking, and making her feel like an outsider in her own marriage. Edward, who had once been so attentive, now seemed blind to Sarah's growing distress. Every decision they made seemed to revolve around his mother, and Sarah couldn't help but feel disregarded in the process. The emotional toll of living with Edward's parents began to take its toll on Sarah. She had hoped that their marriage would bring her closer to Edward, but instead, it seemed to drive a wedge between them. The man she had once loved now seemed distant, and his mother's dominance in their lives made her feel more like a guest than a partner. As the weeks passed, Sarah's frustration reached a boiling point. It was clear that this was just the beginning of a much deeper problem in their marriage. As the wedding day passed, Sarah eagerly anticipated the honeymoon, a chance to escape the pressures of their lives and begin their new journey as a married couple. She had always dreamed of a romantic getaway, just the two of them, to celebrate their love and make lasting memories. Sarah could barely contain her excitement as she began planning the trip, imagining the beautiful destination, the quiet moments together, and the adventures they would share. However, Edward's behavior began to shift in the days leading up to the honeymoon. While Sarah was busy with the final details, Edward seemed increasingly distant and preoccupied. Instead of the excitement she expected, Sarah noticed his reluctance to talk about the trip, constantly deflecting her questions about the itinerary. He took over the arrangements, insistent that he wanted to plan everything himself. At first, Sarah thought it was just his way of taking charge, but something didn't feel quite right. He grew irritated whenever she tried to involve herself in the details, brushing off her concerns with a vague promise that everything would be taken care of. As the day drew closer, Sarah noticed a series of strange red flags. Edward's attitude towards the trip didn't match the enthusiasm she felt. When she tried to discuss what they should pack, he seemed disinterested, almost dismissive. Sarah also noticed that he was unusually adamant about not sharing too many details of the plans with her, saying it was a surprise. Yet despite his efforts to keep the trip under wraps, Sarah began to suspect something was amiss. She couldn't shake the feeling that Edward wasn't as committed to their honeymoon as she was, and that there was something more going on beneath the surface. The small clues, the distance, the secrecy, made Sarah's excitement begin to turn into unease, even before the honeymoon had officially started. The moment Sarah had feared became a horrifying reality when Edward delivered the shocking news. He was not going on the honeymoon with her. Instead, he was taking his mother. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She couldn't process what he had just said. It felt like the ground beneath her had shifted, and she was left reeling in disbelief. "What do you mean?" she stammered, trying to comprehend the cruelty of his words. But Edward's expression was cold, detached, as if he had already made up his mind.
The emotional pain Sarah felt in that moment was overwhelming. She had imagined this trip as a celebration of their love, a moment to solidify the bond they shared as a couple. But now, it felt like everything she had hoped for had been ripped away in an instant. Edward's words echoed in her mind, but it wasn't just the decision that hurt. It was the utter disregard for her feelings, the complete lack of empathy for the woman he had just married. The situation took an even darker turn when Edward did the unthinkable. In a fit of anger, he tore up Sarah's passport. It was a symbol of the future she had imagined for herself. Her passport to adventure, freedom, and a life with the man she had trusted. But in that moment, Edward destroyed it, leaving Sarah feeling trapped, humiliated, and betrayed beyond words. In the midst of her shock, Sarah struggled to make sense of what was happening. Her mind raced, but it was impossible to understand how the man she had married could so heartlessly betray her. The disbelief lingered as she stared at the pieces of her passport on the floor, the weight of the betrayal sinking in. How could this be happening, she thought, struggling to comprehend that the honeymoon, the symbol of their new life together, had been stolen by his mother, a woman who had already caused so much turmoil in their marriage. The emotional pain was sharp, the sting of betrayal cutting through every part of Sarah's being. It felt like the ultimate act of disrespect, and for the first time, she questioned everything about her relationship with Edward. The man she thought she knew seemed to be someone completely different, and Sarah realized with a heavy heart that she might never be able to trust him again. As Sarah tried to process the emotional chaos caused by Edward's betrayal, the pieces of the puzzle slowly began to fall into place. One evening, while cleaning up the house and trying to distract herself from the painful reality, Sarah discovered something that would shatter her world even further. Hidden in a drawer, she found a notebook, its pages filled with details of transactions and notes that didn't make sense at first. As she flipped through the pages, a sickening realization hit her. It was a record of financial dealings between Edward and his mother. The more Sarah read, the clearer it became. The notebook outlined amounts of money that had been embezzled from Edward's company, funds diverted into personal accounts, and even lavish purchases, luxury bags, clothes, and jewelry, all of which had been bought for his mother. The shocking part was that it wasn't just random spending. It was carefully documented, meticulously tracked by Edward and his mother, as if they had planned their scheme for years. The embezzled money, Sarah realized, had funded their lavish lifestyle and their deceitful manipulation of her life. The discovery sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She felt betrayed not only by Edward's abandonment, but by the depths of the deception. She was now faced with the harsh reality that her husband, the man she had trusted, was not just a liar, he was a criminal. His mother, who had already made their lives unbearable, was just as complicit in the scheme. Sarah felt her heart sink as the weight of the betrayal settled in. This wasn't just about a honeymoon stolen or a marriage broken. This was about fraud, about deep corruption and deceit that ran far beyond her relationship with Edward. Despite the emotional shock, a fire started to burn within Sarah. She had always been a reserved woman, careful in her actions, but now she knew she couldn't sit idly by. Edward and his mother had crossed a line, and it was time for Sarah to take action. With the evidence of Edward's and his mother's betrayal staring her in the face, Sarah knew she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. The weight of what she had discovered was too great to bear in silence. She had always been the type to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, but this was different. Her heart shattered for the woman she thought she had married, the man who had promised to love her, and the life she had imagined for herself. But now, it was clear. The only way to regain her dignity and peace was to confront the situation head on. Sarah made the difficult decision to file for divorce, knowing full well the emotional and legal battle it would entail. But what weighed even heavier on her mind was the need to expose Edward's crimes. The embezzlement wasn't just an issue in their personal lives, it was a betrayal that extended to his company and the people who had trusted him. With her mind set on seeking justice, Sarah began meticulously planning her next steps. She reached out to a lawyer recommended by her family, someone who could guide her through the divorce process and help her navigate the complexities of exposing Edward's criminal activities. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just about her personal pain. It was about making sure Edward faced the consequences of his actions. She wasn't just fighting for her own rights, she was fighting for justice, for those who had been wronged by his actions. Despite her growing resolve, Sarah couldn't help but feel torn. There was still a part of her that loved Edward, that remembered the man she had once married. It hurt to acknowledge that he wasn't who she thought he was, that the life they had built together was a lie. But as the days passed, Sarah's resolve grew stronger. She knew she couldn't allow herself to be trapped in a toxic relationship built on lies and deception. The decision wasn't easy, but Sarah knew that in order to heal and move forward, she had to take action. She had to stand up for herself, for her own well-being, and for the truth. When Sarah didn't pick up Edward and his mother from the airport, she knew she was crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. As the phone rang repeatedly, her heart pounded. knowing the chaos that was about to unfold. When she finally answered, Edward's voice was seething with anger. His immediate response was one of pure rage. How could she abandon him after everything he had done for her? How could she refuse to follow his orders? Edward's fury was only the beginning. He tried to manipulate Sarah emotionally, attempting to guilt her into staying in their marriage. His words were laced with a mix of anger, threats, and desperate pleas. He accused her of being ungrateful, of throwing away everything they had built together. The guilt trips came fast and furious. If you divorce me, you'll never find anyone else. No one will want you after this. And then, in a softer, almost pleading tone, if you come back, we can work things out. You can forgive me, right? But Sarah was no longer the shy, reserved woman who had once hoped for a fairy tale marriage. The woman on the other end of the phone was someone different, someone who had seen through the facade of her marriage and understood the depths of betrayal. Edward's manipulation no longer had the power it once did. Each word he spoke felt like a hollow attempt to control her, to gaslight her into thinking she was the one in the wrong. As Sarah moved forward with her divorce, the process became a mixture of painful moments and moments of clarity. She felt the weight of the emotional toll, but she also felt something else: empowerment. She was no longer going to let Edward or his mother dictate her life. The realization that she had the power to expose Edward's criminal actions added a layer of resolve to her determination. His unraveling was now underway, and the consequences of his betrayal were beginning to catch up with him. As Sarah kept moving forward, she knew there was no turning back. This was the right decision, no matter how difficult it felt. The months following her divorce were filled with challenges, but Sarah was determined not to let them define her. She threw herself into her work, and her colleagues, many of whom had been supportive throughout her ordeal, were instrumental in helping her rediscover her sense of purpose. With their encouragement, Sarah excelled at her job, gaining both confidence and respect in her career. The woman who had once been a passive observer in her own life was now a driving force, assertive, focused, and ready to take on whatever came next. Her strength came not just from her success at work, but also from the incredible support system she had built around her. Her family stood by her, her father and sisters providing unwavering love and guidance. And then there was her uncle, who had been a silent yet powerful ally in the background, ensuring she had the legal support she needed and always offering a listening ear when she needed to talk. But perhaps the most significant milestone in Sarah's journey of rebuilding came when she finally decided to take the trip abroad that she had originally planned for her honeymoon. This time, however, she wasn't doing it for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. The trip was a symbol of her newfound freedom and independence, an opportunity to reconnect with the dreams she had once put on hold. As she explored new cities, tasted exotic foods, and marveled at the beauty of unfamiliar places, Sarah realized that her future was entirely hers to shape. Returning from her trip, Sarah felt like a completely different person. She wasn't the victim of betrayal anymore. She was a woman who had faced unimaginable hardship and come out stronger on the other side. She had learned to trust herself again and had reclaimed her power. Her future was full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah was truly excited about the life ahead of her. Just when Sarah thought her life was starting to stabilize, her father-in-law reached out. His voice, heavy with regret, cracked through the phone as he apologized for his role in enabling Edward and his mother's toxic behavior. Sarah had always known him to be kind and sensible, and hearing the sorrow in his voice made her heart ache for him. He confessed how much he had overlooked, how trapped he had felt by his wife's overwhelming demands, and how he had enabled the dysfunction in the family out of a misguided sense of duty. Then came the unexpected twist. Sarah's father-in-law revealed that he had decided to divorce her mother-in-law. After years of enduring her manipulative behavior, he was finally taking a stand. His decision marked a turning point, not just for him, but for Sarah as well. The family dynamic had been irrevocably altered, and now Sarah was left wondering, could her father-in-law truly find peace after such a dramatic change? Or was this just another chapter of unresolved turmoil for her family? The suspense lingered as Sarah braced herself for what might come next. Looking back on her tumultuous journey, Sarah realized how far she had come. From the pain of betrayal to the devastating heartbreak of a marriage built on lies, she had been through the deepest of valleys. But she had also climbed out of those shadows, emerging stronger, more independent, and finally in control of her own life. The woman who had once been unsure of herself was now someone who knew her worth, someone who had reclaimed her power and sense of self-respect. Her story was one of resilience, learning that love, trust, and self-respect could not be compromised, no matter the cost. Through every challenge, Sarah had become her own hero. As she stood on the other side of her divorce, her heart was no longer burdened by betrayal, but filled with hope for the future. In the end, Sarah's journey wasn't just about overcoming heartbreak. It was about understanding that no matter how deep the hurt, there is always the potential for healing and growth. What would you choose? To remain a victim or to rise and rewrite your own story?
But perhaps the most significant milestone in Sarah's journey of rebuilding came when she finally decided to take the trip abroad that she had originally planned for her honeymoon. This time, however, she wasn't doing it for anyone else. She was doing it for herself. The trip was a symbol of her newfound freedom and independence, an opportunity to reconnect with the dreams she had once put on hold. As she explored new cities, tasted exotic foods, and marveled at the beauty of unfamiliar places, Sarah realized that her future was entirely hers to shape. Returning from her trip, Sarah felt like a completely different person. She wasn't the victim of betrayal anymore. She was a woman who had faced unimaginable hardship and come out stronger on the other side. She had learned to trust herself again and had reclaimed her power. Her future was full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah was truly excited about the life ahead of her. Just when Sarah thought her life was starting to stabilize, her father-in-law reached out. His voice, heavy with regret, cracked through the phone as he apologized for his role in enabling Edward and his mother's toxic behavior. Sarah had always known him to be kind and sensible, and hearing the sorrow in his voice made her heart ache for him. He confessed how much he had overlooked, how trapped he had felt by his wife's overwhelming demands, and how he had enabled the dysfunction in the family out of a misguided sense of duty. Then came the unexpected twist. Sarah's father-in-law revealed that he had decided to divorce her mother-in-law. After years of enduring her manipulative behavior, he was finally taking a stand. His decision marked a turning point, not just for him, but for Sarah as well. The family dynamic had been irrevocably altered, and now Sarah was left wondering, could her father-in-law truly find peace after such a dramatic change? Or was this just another chapter of unresolved turmoil for her family? The suspense lingered as Sarah braced herself for what might come next. Looking back on her tumultuous journey, Sarah realized how far she had come. From the pain of betrayal to the devastating heartbreak of a marriage built on lies, she had been through the deepest of valleys. But she had also climbed out of those shadows, emerging stronger, more independent, and finally in control of her own life. The woman who had once been unsure of herself was now someone who knew her worth, someone who had reclaimed her power and sense of self-respect. Her story was one of resilience, learning that love, trust, and self-respect could not be compromised, no matter the cost. Through every challenge, Sarah had become her own hero. As she stood on the other side of her divorce, her heart was no longer burdened by betrayal, but filled with hope for the future. In the end, Sarah's journey wasn't just about overcoming heartbreak. It was about understanding that no matter how deep the hurt, there is always the potential for healing and growth. What would you choose? To remain a victim or to rise and rewrite your own story?